Admiral Park watched the holographic display without blinking. The blue light cast shadows on his weathered face as he observed another human colony falling to the alien fleet. The settlement on Titan, once home to thousands, was now just debris and fire. "That's the third colony this month," said Captain Ba, her voice tight with anger. "We can't keep losing ground like this." The command center was silent except for the soft peeps of monitoring equipment. 12 high-ranking officers sat around the oval table, each face grim with the knowledge that Earth was running out of options. Admiral Park straightened his uniform and pressed a button on the console. The hologram changed to show a complex technical diagram. "Project Heliophagy is our only chance," he said, pointing to the ship design rotating slowly above the table. "This is why I've called you all here today." General Kang leaned forward with a frown. "Heliophagy? Star-eating? You can't be serious." "I am entirely serious," Admiral Park replied. "Scientist Kim has been working on this concept for years, a vessel that can harvest stellar energy directly from stars." "That's impossible," Commander Ju said, shaking his head. The energy requirements alone ruled. "It was impossible," interrupted a soft voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see Scientist Kim enter the room. She was small in stature, but carried herself with quiet confidence. In her hands was a data tablet displaying complex equations. "My team has solved the quantum compression problem," she explained, placing the tablet on the table. "We can now create a contained field that pulls stellar matter into a pocket dimension for processing. The energy output would be enough to power weapons beyond anything we've developed before." Admiral Park nodded. "It would give us the advantage we need against the Void hegemony." "At what cost?" asked Captain Ba. "We're talking about consuming stars. There are ethical implications we can't ignore." Scientist Kim's expression remained calm. "The initial tests would use only brown dwarfs, failed stars with no habitable systems. We've mapped 17 within striking distance of our territory." The room erupted into debate. Some officers argued passionately against creating such a weapon, while others insisted it was their only hope for survival. Admiral Park let them talk, knowing this decision would change the course of human history. The heated discussion continued until Lieutenant Min burst into the room, his face pale. "Sir, urgent transmission from Saturn base," he said, handing Admiral Park a small data chip. The room fell silent as Park inserted the chip into the main console. The hologram shifted to show static, then cleared to reveal the face of Commander Song. Behind him, alarms blared and people screamed. "They're here." Commander Song's voice cracked. "The hegemony fleet just appeared. Hundreds of ships. Our defenses won't hold." The transmission cut to show the orbital view of Saturn base. The massive ring station, home to 10 million civilians and military personnel, was surrounded by alien vessels. Before anyone could speak, a blast of energy tore through the station. The explosion rippled outward, pieces of the once mighty base scattering into space. The transmission went dead. Captain Ba covered her mouth with her hand. 10 million people. Gone. Admiral Park closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself one moment of grief before straightening his shoulders. "The hegemony has made their intentions clear," he said quietly. "They will not stop until humanity is extinct. We no longer have the luxury of ethical debates." He turned to Scientist Kim. "How quickly can you build this ship?" "With unlimited resources and priority access to the orbital shipyards." 9 months. Admiral Park nodded once. "You have 6. "Sir," General Kang protested, "even if we can build this ship, who would crew it? The technology is untested. It could be a suicide mission." "I already have a list of volunteers," Admiral Park replied. "People who lost everything at Titan, Europa, and now Saturn base. They understand what's at stake." He stood and looked at each officer in turn. "This is not a decision I make lightly, but we are faced with extinction. Sometimes survival requires terrible choices." The room was silent as the weight of his words settled over them. Finally, Admiral Park pressed a button, and the ship design appeared again in the hologram. Project HFY is now officially sanctioned by Earth Naval Command, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of necessity. Scientist Kim, you have your authorization. Kim nodded solemnly. We'll begin immediately. As the meeting ended and the officers filed out, Admiral Park remained, staring at the holographic ship design. It was sleek and predatory, unlike any vessel humans had built before. A ship designed not just to fight but to consume the very energy of stars. Build it, he whispered to the empty room, the blue light of the hologram reflecting in his tired eyes. May whatever gods remain forgive us for what we're about to do. Dr. Lee watched the numbers on her screen with unblinking eyes. Her hands moved quickly over the control panel, making small adjustments to the quantum stabilizers. The containment field is holding at 87%, she reported, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That's the highest we've achieved so far. Chief Engineer Han looked up from his workstation across the lab. Dark circles under his eyes showed his exhaustion after working for 3 days straight. It's still not enough, he said, shaking his head. We need at least 95% stability before we can scale up to the main reactor. The laboratory was built inside Asteroid Station Delta, a hidden facility far from the normal shipping lanes. Outside the reinforced windows, construction drones swarmed around the massive frame of the experimental ship taking shape in the orbital shipyard. Dr. Lee stood and stretched her back. Let's try increasing the particle density in the secondary chamber. Han nodded and began typing commands. Running simulation first. The holographic display between them lit up, showing a swirling mass of energy contained within nested fields of force. As they watched, the simulation showed the energy growing more stable, the violent red pulses fading to a steady blue glow. It's working, Dr. Lee whispered. Han, look at this. The containment field in the simulation held steady at 93%. Han's tired face broke into a rare smile. Let's test it on the real thing. They walked together through the connecting corridor to the main testing chamber. The room was circular with a reinforced observation deck overlooking the spherical device surrounded by complex machinery. This was the heart of Project HFY, the miniature version of what would eventually become the ship's core. 3 other scientists looked up as they entered. Dr. Lee quickly explained their new approach. If this works, she said, we'll be ready to install the core in the ship within 2 weeks. Everyone moved to their stations. Han gave the countdown. Particle injection in 3, 2, 1. The sphere in the center of the room began to glow. Inside, highly concentrated plasma swirled faster and faster as the containment field shaped it into precise patterns. The energy readings climbed rapidly. 90%, called out one of the technicians. 91. 92. Dr. Lee held her breath. 93% stability achieved. The team broke into cheers, but Han raised his hand for quiet. Hold on. Let's see if it maintains. They watched anxiously as the seconds ticked by. The containment field fluctuated slightly but remained above 93%. 1 minute of stable containment, Dr. Lee announced finally. We did it. The door to the lab slid open, and Commander Song walked in. His military uniform stood out among the lab coats. He nodded, seeing their excited faces. Good news, I hope. Dr. Lee quickly explained their breakthrough. Commander Song's serious expression softened slightly. Excellent work. Admiral Park will be pleased. He walked to the viewing window that overlooked the shipyard. Come see your creation. The scientists joined him at the window. Below them, the massive frame of the ship was now clearly taking shape. Nearly half a kilometer long, its dark hull plates were being attached by construction drones that looked tiny against its enormous size. It's beautiful, Dr. Lee said softly. And deadly, added Han. With our core technology, it will be the most powerful weapon humanity has ever created. Commander Song nodded. That's why we're calling it Prometheus, after the Titan who stole fire from the gods. A fitting name, Dr. Lee said, "for what we're about to unleash." The commander turned to face the team. The hegemony destroyed another colony yesterday. Ganymede Station. 2 million dead. His voice was flat, controlled, but his eyes showed his anger. We don't have the luxury of time. How soon can you have the full-size core ready? Han and Lee exchanged glances. With this breakthrough, 2 weeks to build, another week to install and test. Make it 10 days, Commander Song said. Our scouts report hegemony fleets gathering near Neptune. Earth could be next. After he left, the scientists returned to work with renewed urgency. Dr. Lee stared at the test core, its blue glow casting strange shadows across her face. Do you ever wonder if we should be building this? She asked Han quietly. The engineer was silent for a moment. My family was on Titan when it fell, he finally said. I don't have the luxury of moral questions anymore. Dr. Lee nodded. She understood. They all did. This wasn't just a scientific achievement anymore. It was survival. For the next 10 days, the team barely slept. The core grew larger, the containment field stronger. Finally, the day came to install it in the ship. Dr. Lee stood on the observation platform as the massive sphere was carefully moved into position at the center of Prometheus. The ship's interior was designed around this single component, the heart that would allow it to consume stars. Containment field at 95% and holding, reported a technician. Commander Song joined her, watching as the final connections were made. It's almost alive, isn't it? He said, studying the vessel's sleek predatory lines. A perfect predator. Dr. Lee nodded. And now we just need to find it prey. Captain Choi stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The view screen showed the brown dwarf star growing larger as they approached. Its dull reddish glow barely illuminated the surrounding space, a failed star with no planets orbiting it. Perfect for our first test, Dr. Lee said, standing beside him. No habitable systems to worry about. Choi nodded but remained silent. The weight of command pressed down on him. The Prometheus was humanity's last hope, and he was responsible for its success or failure. Distance to target, 30,000 kilometers, announced Officer Kang from his station. All systems nominal. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. They were a mix of military personnel and scientists, all volunteers who understood the risks of this mission. Most had lost family to the hegemony attacks. All were willing to die if it meant giving Earth a fighting chance. Captain Choi felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet as the ship's massive engines adjusted their approach vector. Bring us to 20,000 kilometers and hold position, he ordered. Prepare absorption systems. Ensign Yoon looked up from her control panel. Absorption systems ready, Captain. Choi could see the young officer's fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the controls. No one had ever attempted to harvest energy directly from a star before. The simulations had been promising, but this was real. Begin pre-absorption sequence, Dr. Lee said, her eyes fixed on her datapad. Quantum fields initiating. The ship hummed with power as the specialized equipment came online. On the view screen, a web of faint blue light began to extend from the Prometheus toward the brown dwarf. Containment fields at maximum, reported Officer Kang. Core stabilizers online. Captain Choi took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. If the ship's systems failed now, they would all die instantly, vaporized by the very stellar energy they were trying to capture. Initiate absorption sequence, he ordered, his voice calm despite the pounding of his heart. Ensign Yoon's fingers now moved with purpose, activating the sequence they had practiced hundreds of times in simulation. The blue web on the view screen pulsed and expanded, surrounding a section of the brown dwarf's outer layer. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship shuddered violently. Captain, something's happening. Officer Kang called out, his eyes wide as he stared at his readings. The stellar matter. It's flowing into the collection chambers. On the view screen, they could see streams of glowing plasma being pulled from the brown dwarf, flowing along the energy web and into the ship. The Prometheus shuddered again, more violently this time. Containment fields holding at 92%. Dr. Lee reported, her voice tight with concentration. Energy levels rising rapidly. The lights on the bridge flickered and then grew brighter. The hum of the engines deepened to a powerful roar that they could feel in their bones. Power levels exceeding projections by 200%, Officer Kang announced, his professional tone giving way to awe. Core energy storage at 15%, 20%, 30%. The view screen automatically adjusted its brightness as the flow of stellar material increased. Outside, the section of the brown dwarf connected to their energy web began to visibly collapse, its matter streaming toward the Prometheus like water down a drain. "This is," Dr. Lee whispered, staring at her readings. "This is beyond anything we projected." Captain Choi watched the brown dwarf, fascination mixing with a touch of horror. They were literally consuming a star, draining its life force to power their vessel. "How long until core storage reaches maximum?" he asked. "At current absorption rate," Kang replied, checking his calculations, "we'll reach 100% in approximately 7 minutes. Another violent shudder ran through the ship. Warning lights flashed at several stations. "Structural integrity holding," reported the engineering officer. "But we're experiencing strain on the forward sections. Containment field fluctuating," Dr. Lee added urgently. 89%, 87%. Captain Choi made a quick decision. "Reduce absorption rate by 30%. We need to find the right balance." Ensign Yoon adjusted the controls, and the ship's shuddering eased somewhat. The flow of stellar material slowed but remained steady. "Containment fields stabilizing at 91%, Dr. Lee announced with relief. "Core storage continuing to fill at a more manageable rate." Captain Choi watched the brown dwarf on the view screen. A visible depression had formed where their energy web connected, as if a giant mouth was taking bites from the star's surface. "Will it completely collapse?" he asked Dr. Lee quietly. She nodded. "Eventually. We're disrupting its gravitational balance. Once we leave, it will likely collapse entirely within a few hours." The implications hung heavily in the air. They had created something that could destroy stars, a weapon of unimaginable power. "Core storage at 75%, Officer Kang reported. "Weapons systems coming online automatically." New displays lit up across the bridge, showing weapon configurations that had never before been possible for a human vessel. The Prometheus wasn't just absorbing energy, it was transforming into something new. "Engine capabilities now at 500% of maximum rated output," the engineering officer said with disbelief. "We could reach Earth in hours instead of days." As the core storage approached 100%, Captain Choi gave the order to disengage. The energy web retracted, leaving the brown dwarf visibly diminished and unstable. "Set course for the test range," he ordered. "It's time to see what this ship can really do." As the Prometheus turned away from the dying star, Captain Choi caught Dr. Lee's eyes. They both understood what they had just witnessed, the birth of a power that could save humanity or unleash terrible destruction upon the galaxy. Dr. Lee sat alone in the science lab, watching the recordings for the 5th time. The holographic display showed the brown dwarf star they had tested on 3 days ago. What had once been a stable, if dim, stellar body was now collapsing in on itself. Around it, the few rocky planets that had orbited the failed star were already showing signs of destabilization. "Computer, show orbital projections for the next 72 hours, she requested. The simulation played forward. 2 of the smaller planets spiraled inward, eventually being consumed by the dying star. The others were flung out of their orbits, becoming rogue planets drifting in the cold of space. "We've created a planet killer," Dr. Lee whispered to herself, rubbing her tired eyes. The door to the lab slid open. Captain Choi entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Lee without a word and pulled up a chair beside her. "You've been watching these recordings for hours," he said. I need to understand exactly what we've done, she replied, taking a sip of the hot coffee. When we designed Prometheus, we calculated the effect on the target star, but we didn't fully consider the consequences for entire star systems. Captain Choi studied the holographic display. Those planets were uninhabitable rocks. This time, Lee said, turning to face him. But what about when we target a real star? One that might have planets with life on them. The nearest hegemony bases are in uninhabited systems, Choi replied. Admiral Park was very clear about target selection. Dr. Lee stood up and paced the small lab. And what happens when those targets are gone? What happens when the only stars left to consume are the ones with populated worlds? Captain Choi's face hardened. The aliens have killed billions. Saturn Base, Titan, Ganymede, Europa, all gone. What choice do we have? There's always a choice, Lee insisted. We could limit the use of Prometheus to defensive actions only. We could. You've seen the reports, Choi interrupted. The hegemony is pushing closer to Earth every day. They don't negotiate. They don't take prisoners. They exterminate. Lee fell silent. She knew he was right, but the weight of what they had created still troubled her deeply. I just wonder if we've become the very thing we're fighting against, she said softly. Word of the debate between the captain and chief scientist spread quickly through the ship. By dinner time, the crew mess hall had divided into two camps. One group, mostly military personnel, argued that any weapon was justified against an enemy like the hegemony. The other group, led by several scientists, worried about the long-term consequences of using such a destructive force. Engineer Han sat with a group of officers, his voice rising above the others. The energy we harvested from one small brown dwarf was enough to power weapons that could destroy an entire fleet, he said. Imagine what we could do with a full-sized star. That's exactly what worries me, replied Medical Officer Jin from across the table. There's no going back from this kind of power. Once it's used, it changes everything. Officer Kang slammed his hand on the table. My entire family was on Ganymede. They didn't get to debate the ethics of warfare before they were vaporized. The argument grew more heated until Ensign Yoon suddenly stood up. Everyone, quiet, listened to the comms. The room fell silent as they all turned toward the overhead speakers. A distorted voice was coming through. Repeat, emergency broadcast to all Earth forces. Hegemony fleet has breached Mars' defensive line. Phobos station destroyed. Deimos station not responding. Ground defenses overwhelmed. Mars has fallen. Repeat, Mars has fallen. All available ships respond. The message continued, but many in the mess hall were no longer listening. Mars was the last major defense point before Earth itself. If Mars had fallen, Earth would be next. Captain Choi entered the room, his face grim. All eyes turned to him. You've heard the transmission, he said. Admiral Park has ordered Prometheus to proceed immediately to the Mars system. We are to engage the hegemony fleet with extreme prejudice. The Martian colonies, Dr. Lee began. There are still millions of people. Most have been evacuated. Choi interrupted. Those who remain. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The room was silent. We depart in 30 minutes, Captain Choi continued. All personnel to battle stations. This is what Prometheus was built for. As the crew dispersed to their posts, Dr. Lee approached the captain. If we do this, she said quietly, if we use Prometheus at full power in the Mars system, we might destroy what's left of the planet along with the hegemony fleet. Captain Choi met her gaze steadily. And if we don't, Earth is next. 20 billion people. Dr. Lee closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. I understand. The time for philosophical debate had ended. As Prometheus prepared for its first real battle, Dr. Lee returned to her lab to make final adjustments to the stellar core. The ship had been designed to consume stars. Now it would show the galaxy exactly what that meant. On the bridge, Captain Choi settled into his command chair and gave the order. Set course for Mars. Maximum speed. The Prometheus emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the TOS-CD system. The star glowed golden in the distance, surrounded by the massive hegemony armada that had destroyed the Mars colonies 2 weeks earlier. Captain Choi stood on the bridge, his uniform crisp despite the days of tension. Around him, the crew worked at their stations with grim focus. They all knew what was at stake. "Count 117 enemy vessels," Officer Kang reported, his voice steady as he read the sensor data. "Mostly heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts." Captain Choi nodded. "Any sign they've detected us?" "Not yet, Captain. We're still at extreme range." Dr. Lee joined Captain Choi at the central display, studying the hegemony fleet. "They're arranged in a standard defense formation around their command ship," she observed. "They don't appear to be expecting an attack." "Then let's announce ourselves," Captain Choi said. "Communications, open a channel to the hegemony command vessel." Ensign Yoon's fingers moved quickly over her console. "Channel open, Captain." The main view screen flickered, then displayed the alien commander. The hegemony species had gray-blue skin and multiple eye stalks that moved independently of each other. The commander's mouth opened in what humans had learned was their expression of contempt. "Human vessel," the alien's translated voice grated through the speakers. "You are either brave or foolish to enter this system." Captain Choi stepped forward. "This is Captain Choi of the Earth vessel Prometheus. You have attacked our colonies and killed millions of our people. We demand your immediate surrender." The alien commander's eye stalks quivered, and a harsh sound came through the speakers. It took the crew a moment to realize it was laughter. "You send one ship against our armada." The alien's laughter echoed through the communications array. "Your species truly is as primitive as we believed. We will add your vessel's remains to the debris of your pathetic Mars colonies." Captain Choi's expression remained neutral. "This is your only warning. Surrender or be destroyed." The alien commander made a dismissive gesture. "Your death will be painful, human." The connection cut off. "They're powering weapons systems," Officer Kang reported. "Multiple vessels breaking formation to intercept us." Captain Choi turned to Dr. Lee. "Time to show them what Prometheus can do." He returned to his command chair and pressed a button on the armrest. "All hands, battle stations, initiate Operation Heliophagy." Throughout the ship, crew members secured equipment and prepared for what was to come. In the engine room, Engineer Han's team monitored the star core containment systems, making final adjustments. "Set course for TOS-CD," Captain Choi ordered. "Full power." The Prometheus surged forward, its engines glowing with the energy harvested from their previous target. The hegemony vessels moved to intercept, their weapons charging. "Enemy vessels firing," Kang announced. The first volley of alien energy weapons struck Prometheus, causing the ship to shudder. "Shields holding at 92%, reported the defensive systems officer. "Minimal damage." Captain Choi nodded. "Continue approach to TOS-CD. Ignore the enemy vessels for now." The alien ships fired again, this time with their full arsenal. Beams of destructive energy slammed into Prometheus from multiple directions. "Shields at 78%, came the report. "They're concentrating their fire, sir." Captain Choi remained calm. "Maintain course. How close are we to optimal absorption range?" 3 minutes to optimal position, Kang replied. On the view screen, they could see more hegemony vessels moving to intercept them. The aliens clearly didn't understand why a single human ship would be heading toward the star instead of engaging their fleet. "Enemy commander hailing us again," Ensign Yoon announced. "Ignore it," Captain Choi said. "Focus on reaching the target coordinates." Prometheus rocked under another barrage of alien weapons fire. "Shields at 62%, came the warning. "We can't take much more of this, Captain." "We won't need to," Choi replied. Status of star core systems. Dr. Lee checked her readings. "All systems ready. Absorption field can be activated on your command." The ship shuddered again as a particularly powerful blast struck their stern. Shields at 48%. The defensive officer called out. Hull breach on Deck 7. Emergency systems responding. Optimal position reached, Officer Kang announced. Captain Choi gave a single nod to Officer Kang. Activate stellar absorption field. Kang's fingers flew over his controls. Absorption field activating now. From the bow of Prometheus, a web of blue energy extended outward toward Ta Ceti. The energy field made contact with the star's outer layers and immediately began to pull stellar material toward the ship. Absorption has begun, Dr. Lee reported, her eyes fixed on her instruments. Energy levels rising rapidly. The hegemony vessels continued their attack, but their weapons seemed to have less effect now. Some of their energy blasts were being drawn into the absorption field, adding to the power flowing into Prometheus. Core energy storage at 30%, 40%, 50%, Kang called out, rising faster than projected. The stellar absorption field grew wider, pulling more material from the star. On the view screen, they could see Ta Ceti's surface beginning to dimple inward where the energy field connected. Weapons systems fully charged, announced the tactical officer, ready to fire on your command. The alien vessels were now firing desperately, some attempting to retreat as they finally began to understand what was happening. Target the main concentration of enemy vessels, Captain Choi ordered. Single pulse burst. Target locked, the tactical officer replied. Firing. A beam of pure stellar energy erupted from Prometheus, so bright that the view screen had to dim to protect the crew's eyes. The energy pulse swept across space and struck the center of the hegemony fleet. When the light faded, a third of the alien armada was simply gone, vaporized by the concentrated power of a star. As the nearby sun dimmed perceptibly, the alien laughter stopped. The remaining hegemony vessels froze in place, as if their commanders couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Enemy commander hailing us, Ensign Yoon reported, her voice quiet with awe at what they had just done. Captain Choi straightened his uniform. On screen, the alien commander appeared, all traces of arrogance gone. Its eye stalks were pulled close to its head in what human xenologists had identified as extreme fear. What have you done? The alien asked, its translator unable to fully convey the horror in its voice. Captain Choi's face was like stone. We warned you. This is just the beginning. 3 months had passed since the battle at Ta Ceti. Prometheus had changed the course of the war, leading the small Earth fleet on a relentless campaign against hegemony strongholds. System after system had fallen as the ship consumed 4 stars, each time growing more powerful. Captain Choi stood at the viewport in his quarters, staring at the distant points of light. He hadn't slept properly in days. Something about their victories felt hollow, tainted by what they were becoming. The door chimed. Enter, he called. Dr. Lee stepped inside, carrying her datapad. Her face looked tired, with new lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when their mission began. You wanted to see my report, she said, handing him the pad. Choi scanned the technical data, most of it beyond his understanding. But one conclusion was clear. Each star we consume makes the dimensional rift larger, Dr. Lee explained, pointing to a graph that showed a steadily growing anomaly. The quantum pocket we're creating to store stellar energy isn't just storing it. It's going somewhere, Choi finished for her. She nodded. And that's not all. Lieutenant Ba has made a discovery in the hegemony transmission logs we captured at Rigel. Captain Choi set down the pad. Show me. They walked together through the corridors of Prometheus. The crew they passed looked victorious but exhausted. Some saluted Captain Choi with an almost religious reverence. The ship had become a symbol of humanity's revenge, and he its prophet. Lieutenant Ba was waiting for them in the linguistics lab. She stood as they entered, her usually calm face showing signs of worry. Captain, Doctor, she greeted them. I've been analyzing the oldest communications in the hegemony archives. They date back nearly 5,000 years. She activated a holographic display. Strange symbols appeared, along with their translated meanings. The hegemony has a prophecy, Ba explained. It speaks of a species that would one day create a weapon called. She checked her notes. The closest translation is Star Eater, or Devourer of Suns. Prometheus, Dr. Lee whispered. Ba nodded. According to these texts, the hegemony has been hunting for this species for millennia, eliminating any civilization that showed signs of developing the technology. That's why they attacked us without warning, Captain Choi realized. They weren't expanding their territory. They were trying to prevent us from building Prometheus. But why? Dr. Lee asked. Why fear this technology so much? Lieutenant Ba scrolled to another section of text. Because of what it awakens. She highlighted one passage. Their oldest texts speak of an ancient entity that exists between dimensions, something they call the Hunger. Captain Choi frowned. You're saying they believe in some kind of monster. I thought so too at first, they replied. But then I found these. She pulled up scientific readings taken by hegemony researchers thousands of years ago. They detected energy anomalies similar to what we're creating with our stellar absorption technology. Dr. Lee took over the display, comparing the ancient readings to their own recent data. They match, she said quietly. Perfectly. The three of them stood in silence, the implications sinking in. We need to run more tests before our next target, Dr. Lee finally said. Captain Choi nodded. How long? 12 hours. I need to recalibrate our sensors to scan the dimensional boundary during absorption. You have 8, Choi replied. The 5th target is already selected. A red giant in the hegemony's Arcturus colony system. Back on the bridge, Officer Kang reported that the small Earth fleet accompanying Prometheus was in position. The hegemony forces at Arcturus were preparing for a desperate last stand. Captain Choi gave the orders to begin the approach, but his mind was on the conversation with Lee and Ba. What if they were wrong about everything? What if the weapon they had built served some other purpose entirely? As Prometheus prepared for its 5th star consumption, Dr. Lee worked frantically in her lab, adjusting the sensors to peer into the dimensional rift they created during absorption. Her hands moved quickly over the controls, setting up the new detection grid. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Ba continued translating more of the ancient hegemony texts. One passage made her blood run cold. The hunger grows with each star consumed. It waits beyond the veil, patient for countless suns, until the Devours unwittingly open the way. When Prometheus reached the Arcturus system, the hegemony fleet was waiting. Their ships formed a protective ring around the red giant star, a final defense of their colony worlds. Captain Choi ordered the absorption sequence to begin, but this time Dr. Lee was watching more than just power levels. Her modified sensors were focused on the quantum boundary between dimensions. As stellar matter flowed into Prometheus, Dr. Lee saw it, a glimpse of something vast and dark on the other side of the rift, something that seemed to reach toward the energy flowing past the dimensional boundary. She rushed to the bridge, her face pale. "Captain, we need to stop," she said urgently. "Something is taking the energy we're collecting. Something alive." Captain Choi looked from her to the view screen, where the hegemony ships were already beginning to fall to their weapons. "What if we're being used?" Dr. Lee asked, her voice shaking. "What if we're feeding something on the other side of that rift?" Before Choi could respond, the ship shuddered violently, not from enemy fire, but from within, as if something was pulling at the very core of Prometheus. "Sir," Officer Kang called out, his voice tight with alarm. "Something's happening to the core. The energy, it's not just flowing in anymore." Captain Choi watched as the readings on Kang's display spiked wildly. "It's reaching back," Dr. Lee whispered. The Prometheus moved silently through space, its hull scarred from months of battle. Ahead loomed the golden sun of the hegemony homeworld, the final target in humanity's campaign of vengeance. Around the star orbited the alien civilization's birthplace, a blue-green planet teeming with billions of lives. Captain Choi stood on the bridge, his face showing the weight of recent revelations. The crew worked quietly at their stations, the usual pre-battle excitement replaced by unease. Hegemony fleet detected, Officer Kang announced. They're positioning themselves between us and their sun. On the view screen, hundreds of alien vessels formed a protective barrier. It was the largest concentration of hegemony ships they had ever encountered. A desperate final defense. They know what we're planning, Dr. Lee said, standing beside Captain Choi. They're trying to protect their sun at all costs. 6 stars had already fallen to Prometheus. 6 stellar systems thrown into chaos as their primary energy source was drained away. The victories had pushed the hegemony to the brink of defeat, but each success had made the dimensional rift grow larger. Status of the rift? Captain Choi asked quietly. Dr. Lee checked her readings. Unstable and expanding. If we consume this star, I don't think we can prevent a complete breach. The implications hung in the air. Whatever waited on the other side of that dimensional boundary would have direct access to their universe. Prepare for absorption sequence, Captain Choi ordered, his voice firm despite his doubts. Target the hegemony sun. The bridge crew hesitated for just a moment before carrying out his commands. They had come too far to turn back now. Captain, Ensign Yoon called out suddenly. We're receiving a transmission, but it's not from the hegemony. Captain Choi frowned. Source? Unknown, sir. The signal pattern doesn't match anything in our database. It's coming from everywhere. On screen, Choi ordered. The view screen flickered, but instead of an image, it displayed only pulsing patterns of light. Strange symbols flowed across the bottom, rearranging themselves as the ship's computer attempted to translate. The universal translator is struggling, Lieutenant Ba said, working at her station. It's like nothing we've encountered before. Wait, I'm getting something. Words began to appear beneath the pulsing lights. Danger, rift expands, the hunger waits. More symbols, more translation. VEFA Buraki between Daime and Sizoens, VEAKNs. CEs Consumchin. Captain Choi stared at the message. Can we respond? Lieutenant Ba shook her head. I don't know how, sir. The message continued. We are ETEWATG. We AHVSEENTHSB4. Civilizations rise. They discover the power of STRs. They feed the hunger. They fall. Dr. Lee's face had gone pale. They're saying we're not the first. Other civilizations discovered this technology before. The hegemony once wall LKD or PAT. They learned. They stopiged. They BCA nu Dians against the hunger. Captain Choi's hands gripped the edge of his console. They were trying to stop us because they'd done the same thing. They weren't conquerors. They were trying to prevent us from opening the rift. The bridge was silent as the crew absorbed this revelation. Everything they had believed about the war had been wrong. The alien signal continued. There is ANOTAER way. Still ours GIV free ally would need not be taken. With those words, new information began flooding into their computer system. Technical specifications, equations, theoretical models. Dr. Lee's eyes widened as she reviewed the data. This is incredible. It's showing us how to modify our technology. Can you understand it? Captain Choi asked. She nodded slowly. I think so. Instead of creating a one-way flow of energy, it shows how to establish a harmonic resonance with the star's natural energy output. She looked up at Captain Choi. We can use this technology to share energy, not just consume it. How long to implement these changes? With engineer Han's help, maybe 2 hours. Captain Choi looked at the hegemony fleet still waiting to engage them. Do it. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Lee and Engineer Han worked feverishly to modify the absorption matrix. The rest of the crew waited anxiously, watching the alien fleet that seemed equally hesitant to attack. Finally, Dr. Lee returned to the bridge. "It's ready, Captain. But it's untested. We don't know if it will work." Captain Choi nodded. "Open a channel to the Hegemony command ship." When the alien commander appeared on screen, Captain Choi spoke clearly and calmly. "We have received a message from the Watchers. We understand now why you attacked us. We're modifying our technology and request a ceasefire while we test it." The alien commander's eye stalks quivered in what might have been surprise. After a long moment, it responded, "You have heard the Watchers. This changes everything. We will stand down, but remain vigilant." With the Hegemony fleet backing away, Captain Choi gave the order to activate the modified system. "New harmonic field activating," Officer Kang announced. Instead of the blue web of energy that had been their signature, a golden pulse extended from Prometheus toward the star. When it made contact, there was no violent pulling of stellar material. Instead, waves of energy began flowing naturally along the connection, like water finding its level. "It's working," Dr. Lee said in amazement. "We're receiving stellar energy, but the star remains stable. No rift formation detected." The ship's systems came alive, power levels rising steadily but safely. "The Hegemony ships are scanning us," Officer Kane reported. On the view screen, the alien commander returned. "You have done what we could not. For 1,000 years, we have guarded against the technology that nearly destroyed us. We never found a way to use it safely." Captain Choi stood tall. "Perhaps it's time for our species to work together. We have much to learn from each other." When deployed, the modified Prometheus didn't devour the sun but established a stable energy network. The war ended not with destruction, but with the promise of a new understanding between civilizations who had both looked into the abyss and chosen to step back. And somewhere beyond the thin veil of reality, the ancient hunger that had waited for countless eons would have to wait longer still.